editing for the web. I'm about to give what I think is the most important lecture of the entire course. And you might ask, wow, you're coming out of the gate with the most important lecture. I'm going to share with you why. When I first started teaching this class, I noticed that there were really small things that I kept having to give students feedback on that weren't necessarily areas that you would have large amounts of points deducted in your work, but I kept seeing students miss these particular concepts or techniques. And I thought to myself, what if instead of me in the feedback section having to type this stuff out 1,000,000 times over and over again for every student over the course of the month, what if instead I created a lecture at the beginning of the month that highlighted these things that are just like, hey guys, I really want you to pay attention to these things in your work, because if you are able to successfully navigate these 10 commandments or these 10 tricky areas, you will have basically won the course. Like if you can apply all of this in your work, and not just in your work for like your assignments, but like in any type of content that you create for online, I will feel like you are majorly successful in editing for the web knowledge. So I'm going to go through these. It's a pretty demanding lecture. It's probably going to take me about 40 minutes to complete, right? But again, I do think that this is the most important content that I will share with you all month. And you'll see all of this reiterated again at different points in time. And of course, I'll highlight this and I'll say, think back to that 10 Commandments lecture when I asked you guys to be thinking about this or looking out for that. Specifically, this stuff will inform the sites that you build and the portfolio that you develop for yourself. Here we go. Commandment number 1, please, pretty please, create meaningful hyperlinks and launch them in a new browser window when appropriate. This is something that I see over and over again, and I initially get students to pay attention to this in FSO, but then I see that they don't apply the concept or the knowledge on their blog when they post material there, right? So just to kind of circle back, every assignment in this class, I ask you to post it on your blog. I do that for a couple of reasons. The first reason is because when you're posting to your blog, I want to highlight that you are posting to an online interactive environment. It's like you're posting to a web page. All the concepts and the techniques that we're talking about, you need to apply them to your blog. Although you're not being graded on the structure of these posts, if you are not creating meaningful hyperlinks, for example, in your blog post, then I know you don't get it, right? This is just another area for you to demonstrate what you are learning. And I'm going to go into more detail about this right now. All right, what does it mean to create a meaningfully titled hyperlink? It means to create a descriptive title for the link instead of just posting click here or a straight up URL, right? So I have kind of a diagrammed examples up here. The links are the red text on the screen, and I call this slide the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good example is the top one, and the title of this link, in terms of what the user reads on the screen, gives the user some indication of what content or material they will find when they click on that link. So let me ask you this. When you click on the top link, where do you think you're going to go? The week 1 project, right? It's intuitive. You're like, okay, this leads me to believe I'm headed to the week 1 project, right? If you were to click on the second link, I call this one the bad example. It says click here for more. Where do you think you're going to go? But in a very general sort of way, right? So it's titled because it's not just the URL, which is the web address that we see at the top of the browser windows. It's titled, but it's not meaningfully titled, meaning that it's open to interpretation, right? You see things like more info, click here, to read more. Now, sometimes, let me kind of digress for a second and talk about, do you guys know what screen readers are? Screen reader is an assistive technology device for individuals who have visual impairments. Like, so if you have a hard time seeing, or maybe you're even blind completely, it allows those individuals to navigate websites through voice commands, right? And so this assistive technology, I'm really going to dumb down this process, for the sake of this example. But let's say I have some sort of visual impairment and I have a hard time, reading the screen, right? So I say, screen reader. I said, take me to this particular website. Okay, it takes me to the website. Screen reader, tell me all of the links on the page, right? And if all of the links are meaningfully titled, it might sound like home, about, services, contact us. And each one of those link titles is descriptive enough that I could say, okay, if I can't see what content is on the page, I think that intuitively, if I want to know the location of this business, that I should say, screen reader, take me to the location page, right? But what if all of the links on the page are not meaningfully titled, but very vaguely titled, and just say, click here for more, right? Then I say, screen reader, tell me all the links on this page, and it just says, click here for more, click here for more, click here for more. And you can see that there's nothing that is descriptive about it that would give me a clue to know where I should go to find the information that I'm looking for. Because, when people come to a website, they're there for, generally one of three reasons, which is to get an answer about something, to satisfy a goal in some way, or to complete a task, right? We're all very, driven in why we are at places. So we have an agenda, we have a mission, right? And so I need for the content that you create to be specific and intuitive enough that you can aid me on my mission to find out whatever I'm there to do, right? So the last example is the ugly example, and I call this the straight up URL, or the gobbledygook. Now, we have a lot of international students in MCBS who might not understand the colloquialism of gobbledygook, but it basically is just like a term to describe something that's like blah, 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 right? It is just a collection of characters that forms a web address that will take you to some location. Sometimes you can parse out certain things in the URL that might give you an indication, but who has time for that? Like, who looks at a URL and goes, I wonder where this is going to take me, right? You just don't. These are small design like good design, you don't notice it because it just facilitates your next move. Bad design, you notice it because it becomes a blockade to whatever it is that you want to do. So here's a great example. So we all use Google Docs and, love them, love them, love them, love them. But have you ever seen a URL to a Google Doc? It usually takes about like 2 to 3 lines of whatever, wherever you're posting it or pasting it, right? And it's usually just a gobbledygook of a lot of letters and numbers and all of these things. So the example that we see on screen here, the top example and the bottom example, the top example is the ugly, right? Just a URL, just copied and pasted out of the browser. And the bottom example is a meaningfully titled link. Now they both go to the same place, right? I know that because I created this slide and created that document. But if you didn't know and you looked at both of these and you were trying to get to an example proposal, which one would you select intuitively? Example proposal, right? So again, these are small considerations, but like that's why in this class I call you web strategists, because there's a thoughtfulness behind the design. You're not just making things look pretty, you're making things work well. And these are the considerations to keep in mind moving forward. So anytime I can, I like to show you how this applies to you guys as students in FSO and how it applies to me as an instructor, because those are basically the roles that we keep in each other's lives. So this is a screenshot of the old FSO 3, rest in peace. And so I couldn't have asked for a more perfect example. So the top one that you see up there, one student is submitting his assignment. And the text, it says, blow, period, your, period, mind, exclamation point. And we can see from the yellow text that the word your is the link, right? So is that the good, the bad, or the ugly? It's just the bad, right? Because he has given a title to his link. It says your, but like, what does that tell us about it? Absolutely nothing. I mean, I appreciate his attempt at humor here, and obviously he's very confident in his submission, right? But it is not a meaningfully titled link. It is a generically or vague or even mistitled link, you could argue. The second example is the good example. It says, here's the link to my week 1 practice project inventory, right? So when I see this, I have the confidence, or at least the anticipation, to think that when I click on that link, that I'm going to go to that individual's week 1 practice project inventory. And then the last is the ugly example, which is just a URL that someone copied and pasted from their blog, right? I can look at that and again, like try and parse out different bits of meaningful communication out of there. But again, who has time? Because we think about like who is, okay, I get really kind of geeked out and meta about this, but like this thoughtfulness is where it's at. This is the strategy part of your degree, right? If you don't consider yourself to be like amazing, like an amazing designer or an amazing visual creator, this is the part that you guys pay attention to, because it's the thoughtfulness and the strategy behind the choices that you make, right? So in FSO, when you guys post your link or your homework in there, who is your target audience? Or who is your end user? Yep, the instructors. You're posting that work for us, right? And so you have developed content, you're sharing it in an online space with us. I am your user, right? Part of your goal is to think about my user experience of the content that you create, right? So if that's the case, in FSO, why do I go visit FSO? To grade you, right? And so let's say I've been given all of these examples here. Which do you think is the easiest for me to like skillfully navigate? The middle one, right? We'll talk a little bit more about my user experience as an instructor and then how I translate, kind of that opposite, because you guys are my target audience and users for the content that I create and share in there. And we're going to get into that right now. So one of the things that I ask you guys to do is to make sure, pretty please, again, this is like the sugar on top one, is have your links open in a new browser window or a new browser tab, right? Again, we're thinking about, okay, you're posting, in this class I asked you to post a link to your blog, and in that blog post is where your assignment deliverables are. If I'm going to FSO to grade and I click on your link and it takes me away from FSO and to your blog, how do you think that affects my user experience? Sidetrack. It's a negative experience, right? It sidetracks me because my mission in coming to FSO was to grade, right? And so if you don't open your link in a new browser window, then that negatively impacts my ability to complete my mission. So you've kind of stirred something up in me as a user that was not the best, right? So again, like you think about how does this apply to any other website that you create? All right, if you're building a website for a client, any link that points to another page of that website obviously should open in the same tab or window. But if you are directing someone outside of the site that they have chosen to come to, always make sure that you're opening that in a new browser window. Does that make sense? All right. Next step, commandment number 2. Leverage headings, subheadings, titles, and lists to avoid super dense paragraphs of text. Now, here's a concept that we are going to go over a lot more in week 2, but is the idea that people don't spend a lot of time reading every single word that you put on a web page. They are scanning that information because they have a mission. And that mission, like I said before, is to get a question answered or to satisfy a goal or to complete some sort of a task. And so they're not there to absorb everything that you've put on the page. They are there to find that answer to their question. So here's kind of a visual example of what I'm talking about. The information on the left-hand side is just what I would call dense text. There's nothing really that breaks it up. The information on the right, you can see, has a title, a heading, a subheading, and bulleted lists. The layout of this information allows me as a user to more easily scan it because I can scan those headings and subheadings to look for the section that is most on topic for what I'm trying to find out, right? And bulleted lists are great because it is a way to break up a whole bunch of text and make it easy for me to pinpoint like the very salient ideas. So again, wherever possible, I like to point out how this affects us as instructor and students. So here is an example of one of your projects in FSO. It looks insanely dense, right? This is your week 2 assignment project, right? Like pretty much what I would say the most important project of this class, right? Now this is what really dense paragraph text looks like. And this is me as an instructor not practicing what I preach, because the content that I put in FSO, right, your assignments, you guys are my end user. You're my target audience. So I need to be thinking about, okay, what is their mission for being here? Okay, they're in school. They need to come here to do an assignment. And I take that a step further and I say, okay, knowing, because I actually used to be a Full Sail student myself, knowing that there's a certain amount of anxiety and conscientiousness, right, that you guys have about completing your assignments, wanting to do well, wanting to make sure that you hit all of the requirements, knowing that your grade is on the line, knowing that maybe your financial aid is on the line. Like that's a lot of pressure in terms of reading this material, right? And so if I were to present your assignments to you like this, there's a very good chance that you would miss something because it is not laid out in a way to help facilitate your mission for being there. And I, as your instructor, don't want to put any blocks into place to help you get the information that you need to be successful, right? So this is the exact same assignment when I have applied headings, subheadings, and bulleted lists, right? So you can see just from this basic visual that breaking that text up makes it so that you can scan it, right? Let's say you read the assignment 2 times already and you pretty much know that you've done everything, but you're like, oh, what was it that she said about the layout? You can scan this list in no time flat, find the layout section, figure out what the 3 requirements are, and feel confident about that and just move on with your work, right? So again, like you're thinking here about the strategy behind how you're laying out your information. Does that make sense, you guys? All right, commandment number 3. Please do not center align paragraph text. It decreases the readability of that text. And I want to clarify a few points here. So here you can see that this is paragraph text. It is a dense paragraph at that based on our earlier explanation. You can see that here it is center aligned at the top. Now in English we read from left to right and then down the page. And when there is a different starting point for every line, like there is at the center alignment on the top, it is more taxing for our eyes because our eyes don't know what point to return to in our scan back to the start of that information, right? It's a little thing, but it actually is a big thing, right? Because if you're putting this information out there for someone to consume or to read it, don't you want to make it as easy to read and consume as possible, right? So anytime you have paragraph text, and I kind of define that as, sentences or a long phrase or statement, you want to make sure that it is left aligned. Now, never ever? No. Of course there are instances where you can, and that it is beneficial to center align text. It's good for titles and headings and subheadings and in any number of capacities and layouts. I'm giving you the general rule here that if you have paragraph text that contains, a couple sentences or long phrases, it is best to left align that text. This is an example of, see here, I have centered the alignment of the title above and I have left aligned the text because it is a couple sentences long, right? There's your distinction and kind of a show of how that could look. Could you left align that heading text? Absolutely, that would be fine too. I'm just showing you exceptions to the rule. Next up, commandment number 4. 4 out of 10. Remember guys, we have a long way to go, but it is important. Never ever copy and paste content from one environment to the next, right? So have you ever been, here's a good example, working on, let's say, an analysis activity for another class where you have to write 400 to 600 words, and you're like, I'm not going to write this all in FSO because I want to put it into Word, which has a word count, and I want to spell check it there, and you know, what if like my internet goes out and I lose all my content? That's just not a smart thing to do. And you put it in Word, and then you copy it from Word and you paste it into FSO, but like something looks weird about it, right? Like it doesn't exactly translate from one environment to the next. That's because there's code behind the scenes of that editing, you know, program or word processing program that tells the text on the screen how to look, right? So when you apply a style, let's say bold, Times New Roman 24, and we can see how that changes on the screen, there's code behind that and indications in the code that tell it to look like that. When you copy and paste it from one environment like Word or a Google Doc or an email application into a web page, sometimes the web page does not know how to interpret that code with its code, right? And so a lot of times you get very wonky types of content. One area that I see this a lot, actually, you guys, is in your fictitious business project. You're going to be working with a company called Real Deal Tacos. And you've been provided a whole bunch of PDFs that have content that you can use to build that site. A lot of times people will copy and paste text right from that document into the body of a web page. And interestingly, sometimes there are line breaks in some of the text that arbitrarily like break a sentence when it should extend or like longer on the page, and it wraps at a weird spot. But that's because you're copying and pasting from one environment to the next. It looked fine when it was in that PDF, but that's not going to translate directly to looking fine on your web page. These are small but very important considerations for you guys when laying things out on your Real Deal Taco site. So this is kind of a funny example that I like to share. Back in August, I was subbing for Jason Gillette in the gaming and transmedia class, and he did everything he could to make it as easy as possible for me, including like put together a nice like welcome email that I could send to all of them, just introducing myself and saying I'm going to be subbing for a week. And he did it in a Google Doc, and he's like, here's a link to the email, and just send this out before the class, and you'll be good, golden, you know, ready to go. So, you know, in my haste and in kind of not practicing what I know, I copied this text from the Google Doc, and then I put it in the body of an email, and then I hit send. And then I don't know what I needed to do, but I had to go back and look at the email that I sent for some sort of information, and this is what it looked like. Not right. Not right. And that's the way all my students received it, or all the students for the class that I was subbing received it. You can see those weird line breaks that I was telling you about, right? So for whatever reason, when I copied it from a Google Doc, the code in the styling of the Google Doc didn't play nice with my Outlook email editing window, and I ended up sending an email that looks absolutely cryptic and like, what the heck is this teacher doing, and is she qualified to sub for a week? I'm not so sure. So this is kind of just like a word of caution, you guys. Copying and pasting from one environment to the next in terms of the web can produce some very kind of interesting results. A couple things that you can do for that is to, one, generate the content right in that editing window. Two, copy and paste from an environment and then put it into, I'm actually going to exit the slideshow here for a second and show you a program called TextEdit. You can see kind of down here in the bottom. This is a plain text editor that is native on your Macs. If you don't have it in your dock, go to Applications, look for it. It's called TextEdit. And when you launch it, it has the option to look at things in plain text or rich text. Rich text means there are formatting options. I'll load this up. I actually have a few things here. Let's see here. New, and I'll drag this out this window so we can take a look. All right, it looks completely plain. This is a plain text document. As I'm typing here, it's really small. I'm going to blow it up a little bit so you can see it a little bit more. I have no formatting options, These are basically just characters. I can't say make it Times New Roman. I can't say make it 24-point font or make it bold or make it red or anything. It is legitimately plain text. Now, if I were to go to Format, Make Rich Text, what you're going to notice is that these editing options pop up, right? And so now this environment is functioning very similar to, say, Word or the interface of an email, where you can make these sort of stylistic changes. When you make those stylistic changes, you are creating code behind the scenes that tell that text what to look like, right? Now, I'm going to jump back really quick for this demo and go back to plain text. In this area here, let's say I copied text from a Word doc, that had a whole bunch of styles applied to it. When I paste it in here, it strips it of everything, right? It takes all of the code out and makes it totally plain text. It is clean. At that point, you can copy it and paste it into your web page and not worry that you're also pasting code. Does that make sense? This is it kind of like washes it all clean here in the plain text editor. All right, jumping back to our keynote here and on to commandment number 5. Never ever display text as an image. No pictures of words. This is, it's hard to articulate, but easy to show, right? So what this means, you guys, is do not screenshot words and put that as like text content on a website, right? Why do you not do this? Because it decreases the usability of that information. When you screenshot text, you're turning editable text into a picture, right? And that picture is comprised of a whole bunch of different pixels, right? At this point, there's no text on this image. There are a collection of pixels that form the shape of a letter and that form a shape of a word or maybe a sentence, but there's no longer text on there. It's a picture of words. When you create a picture of words, the other thing that happens is that there's compression on that image, right? Back in the day when there were not very fast internet loading times, you really had to be concerned about the size of the files that you are putting out there, because if someone's on dial-up and you have some really heavy files, it was going to take forever for your page to load, right? And so what happens is that images are compressed generally for the web environment, so they load really fast. That compression makes things just a little bit fuzzy, right? And when something's kind of fuzzy, that makes it harder to read because it's a little more blurry, right? The other thing that it does when you screenshot words and share them, supposedly as text, is that it decreases the search engine optimization of your site, right? Because it reduces the keyword-rich content. Google can't doesn't look at that screenshot of words and recognize it as words, right? So no longer do you have that rich data basically on your site that will help your site get found or get matched with a user's search terms, right? So this is an example that actually happened during one of my editing for the web classes. We were on a break and I had kind of just gotten done with this lecture. It used to be called the 7 Deadly Sins of Editing for the Web, but I actually found 3 more that I wanted to add, so hence 10 commandments at this point. We were on a break. I had just finished this lecture, and one of the students was like, oh my gosh, what's our next class after this? And then where do we go after that? And what's my graduation date? And blah, blah, blah. And then I said, well, go back to the program on the Full Sail site, and you'll see a layout of everything there. And if you want to, just copy and paste that information and put it in your calendar, right? You can select that text and paste it in your calendar so you have it lined up and you can plan out whatever you need to plan out. And so this student goes to this page and she went to copy and paste the text only to find that it was not text, that it was an image, that someone had created basically a data table in some application and then took a screenshot of it, right? So she got a very immediate example of how that decreases the usability of that information. She wanted to do something different with that information, but she couldn't anymore because it was not usable in that way. So that's a screenshot of the old Full Sail website. We'll see a couple more examples of that. This has since been fixed, you guys, but just as a heads up, like, why would people do this? Like, what, in your minds, why would people screenshot something instead of rebuild it properly in the environment? It's easier, it's faster. It could be laziness. It could also be, now, and then this is what I think in the case of the Full Sail site, that it wasn't laziness, that it was a design consideration. If I were to create this table in, let's say, InDesign and make it like incredibly attractive and like on brand and really sleek and amazing looking, I might not be able to translate that same design aesthetic to the online environment. I might not have that depth of knowledge in coding, or maybe even when the site was created, that even wasn't possible, right? So maybe someone just wanted it to look really pretty. In a lot of cases, I see this in resume design. Hence, where do I see this? Resumes is the number one place, right? Because people are used to designing a resume to be printed. And in print design, it's a static environment, meaning that a printed page is 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And that you can use programs like InDesign or Illustrator or even Microsoft Word to create something that's kind of visually stunning, right? But that you might not be able to mimic that same look and feel to your heart's desire on a web page because you don't have that design know-how, or maybe the content management system that you're using is difficult for you to navigate in that way. So maybe you have a beautiful InDesign resume that you want to share on your website. So you decide you're going to take a screenshot of that, and then you put that on your website. Okay, what you've done is you've created a very useless picture of words because it doesn't have keyword-rich content anymore. So let's say that I was looking for the search terms Jason, wrestler, actor, and I put in this combination of things that I'm hoping will lead me to Jason, right? If that's the way his resume is presented on his website, I'm not going to find him by those terms because Google won't associate that resume, that picture of words, collection of pixels, with my search terms. Right? Does that make sense? That's right, right? So one of the questions was, and I'm just repeating this for online listeners, she was talking about screenshotting lynda.com certificates. So, a lot of you guys like to, on portfolio websites, share your lynda.com certificates. Now, that's tricky for a number of reasons, and we'll get into that a little bit more later this month when we talk about your portfolios. When you screenshot a Lynda certificate, instead of providing, let's say, a PDF, it loses the keyword-rich quality about it. The other thing about a Lynda certificate is they all look the same. And so, if you have, 50 Lynda certificates, there's not much that distinguishes them other than the title. And if you're posting it at a very small size and you can't read the title, what's the point? You can't even really see. So my recommendation always with the Lynda certificates is to, in a skills section, say, type out, these are the skills that I have. And then if you want to link that, skill to a Lynda certificate, then link it to the PDF of that. All right. The other place that I see this, you guys, is in the content placement on the fictitious business website for Real Deal Tacos. You've been supplied a few PDFs, and the PDFs are minimally styled, meaning that they have an aesthetic that was created by the business. And people want to carry that aesthetic over to the website. So instead of recreating it, they take what they think is probably an efficient route, which is screenshot the PDF and then drag that and put it on a web page. But again, not usable and not appropriate, and will be marked off for that particular activity if you follow that course. Commandment number 6, you guys, please observe consistent padding. Think breathing room, right? This, if I'm ever in a final portfolio presentation with you, or even one for Jacob's graphic design class, this is actually great for you guys in the classroom with me because you are in Jacob's graphic design class. Inset padding is the idea that the content that you are sharing should not butt up against the edges of the container that you put it in, right? Programs like Microsoft Word, they account for this by giving you a margin on the document, right? Like when you open a Word doc, the words don't go all the way to the end of the screen, right? You have a margin, and you set that margin for, whatever's useful, right? Like if you're printing it, you want to make sure that it matches whatever the printer can do, right? So that margin is the same thing, kind of this idea of inset padding. You don't want the content that you put into a container to go all the way up against the edges of that container. Give it kind of like a bubble wrap, if you will, right? So that it has room to breathe inside that container. This works the same for text and images. Let me show you an example. So the example at the top here has just text in a container, and you can see how it goes pretty much all the way up to the top and all the way to the bottom and all the way to the left and all the way to the right of that top example. If I applied a consistent, let's say 30 pixel padding around that entire container or around that text, it's like I'm putting a bubble wrap around it, right? And so then I raise the opacity so that you could see what it looks like in the bottom, which is where it's as if the content is floating evenly in the middle of that container, right? It's not a little bit more to the top than it is to the bottom. It isn't more to the right than it is to the left. It is floating vertically center and vertically horizontal in the container, right? That is consistent padding in that container. Same thing with images, right? So let's say you're placing this star image on a web page. You want to make sure that you give it some breathing room, some floating room, and you would just do that by making sure that it is kind of the same distance from the top, the bottom, the left, and the right of that container. Is that clear to you guys? All right. Commandment number 7. This is a big usability consideration. You want to ensure color and texture contrast to just maximize the readability and ultimately the usability of the content that you're sharing. So here's an example. Can you read this? How about now? How about now? How about now? And then there's a fourth one down there. How about now? So you can see how my color choice here affects your ability to read this content, and not just read it, but also interpret it in some ways, right? So that really super light gray text at the bottom that you can barely see, that does not offer enough color contrast. We could argue that the rest have, decently adequate color contrast. The other, middle gray is questionable. Like, it's okay for this statement, but what if you had to read, what if this was how your digital textbook was, right? Like your eyes would become so fatigued, right? And it would be an obstacle or a barrier to you getting that information, and therefore not good design choices. The black against the white is the extreme and ultimate color contrast. And likewise, white text on a black background would also offer extreme color contrast. The red choice up there, you can see it, but also be thinking about what does the color red signify, and is this appropriate for the messaging and the communication of this choice? What kind of aesthetic connotation does red text offer? Stands out. What did you say, Kayla? Okay, it also could maybe make it look like a link, depending upon, absolutely. What else? Like metaphorically does red symbolize? Important. All right. Yes, to stand out. Other things I've heard in the past are, anger, passion, heat, intensity. These are all things that the color red can conjure up for people. That might work for certain kinds of content and certain kinds of styling. But is red text an appropriate choice for, let's say, a Zen spa? Probably not, right? What color might be a more appropriate choice? All right, black, white, green, green over there, just something that's a little bit calmer, right? So again, be thinking about how your color contrast and choices, shape the interpretation and the absorption of your messaging. So here you can see that I removed the white background on the same text, and there's kind of a textured pattern back there. And you'll see this a lot on websites these days where you have like a large banner image and then you have, maybe it's a texture or maybe it's a kind of a really cool high-res photography and you have some text over it. That design is only as effective as the text ability to be seen and read, right? Because when you put text over an image, you're basically putting that as a higher level of importance over the picture. And if I cannot read what you've put on the top, which is the most important stuff on this stack of assets, then it's not effective design, right? In this instance here, you can see we've got some color contrast issues. The gray at the top looks kind of weird in an area. In the black, which used to stand out the most, now doesn't stand out the best at all. There are tricks and things that you can do by like maybe putting a shadowing on your text, or maybe you put like a canvas behind it like this, and then it's hard to see on the monitor up there because it's blown out a little bit, but you put a canvas behind that text and you drop the opacity of that canvas just a little bit, like a tiny see-through. So maybe I can get a little bit of that texture, that pop, that layering that I was looking for, but it doesn't compromise the absorption or the readability of the material, right? You see this a lot with kind of a ghosted background over an image, or sometimes it's a shadowed background of an image. Commandment number 8. Add image titles and descriptions to slideshows or galleries that you create on websites. This is like dotting your I's and crossing your T's. What you're doing there is you are adding keyword-rich content, associating that with the images, and ultimately increasing the optimization of your website, right? You're also providing a service to the users because anytime you put a title, you're adding metadata or descriptions. So let's say that picture doesn't load. For some reason, it doesn't load when the page loads, and it's just left blank. If you give it a title or alt text or a description, that might show when the picture doesn't. So the user knows what they're supposed to see there, right? Instead of just kind of an empty space. Additionally, and especially in terms of the Real Deal Taco scenario, you guys might have a gallery of food, or you might be like showcasing a menu item or something, and you don't share like what that menu item is. Well, let's say I'm a user and I'm visiting the site and I was like, oh my gosh, this looks so amazing. This is the taco that I want to order, but I don't know which one it is, so I don't know which one to order when I go, right? So you're giving just a little bit more explanation of something that people will find useful. Now, here's a screenshot from a Real Deal Taco site. For content management systems like Wix, Weebly, Squarespace, many times if you do not, as the designer, go in and add the title and or description information, it will default to the file name of that image, right? So here, the file name was corn tortilla chips close-up, right? That's kind of a meaningful title or a name because it's representative of what we see here on the page. But most of the time, images have names like dsc10035.jpg, which are not relevant and aren't meaningful to the subject matter of the image, right? So again, this commandment is that anytime that you're putting images or a slideshow, make sure you're adding that metadata, titles and descriptions. Why? Again, the accessibility. If it doesn't load on the page, then the user has some indication of what's supposed to be there. Again, think if I'm a visually impaired person and I'm using a screen reader, and I say, screen reader, tell me what images I'm supposed to be seeing, basically. They use that metadata to describe the imagery on the page. And then the SEO, you're associating keyword-rich content with more of the assets on the site, helping your site be found by the people who are looking for it. Commandment number 9, mind the fold and minimize scrolling to get the important content. So you want to take advantage of this high value real estate. Are you guys familiar with the term mind the fold? It's an old newspaper term to describe the area on the top half of a folded newspaper where the top story of the day would go, right? So you know how on a newspaper it folds in half, and then like the top story of the day is on the top half above the fold, right? When you think of newspapers and the way that they used to be sold in dispensers, you'd go and you put your 50 cents in, that little window, right, that the newspaper, the daily newspaper would fit into so you could see, the area that would show through the window was the area above the fold. Now this was designed to share like the most attention-grabbing headline of the day so that a passerby would just stop in their tracks, see that headline and say, I've got to know, the rest of this story or what's happening in the world, and would put their 50 cents in, take a newspaper and go, right? On a website, the area above the fold is to describe the viewable space of a website before you have to start to scroll, right? So it's like the initial snapshot that you get when you visit a website, and it is the only place that you can guarantee that a user will see, right? And in that space, you want to be sure that you have a few very important things: branding information, identification information. You want to make sure that you have clear and intuitive navigational options. Something that's visually impactful or inviting. You want to make sure that whatever that person has come to your site for, they either get it immediately or they know the next step that they should take to get it. Okay? I call this the high value real estate area because, again, it is the only place that you can guarantee that a user will see on your site, because if they come to your site and they don't know where to go next, it's not clear to them, they don't know if they've made it to the right site, they can just choose to go somewhere else, right? You need to provide the next step, and it needs to be right there before they have to scroll to get anything. So here's a screenshot from the old Full Sail University website. Let me ask you this. Who is the target audience for the Full Sail University website? Students? Young adults? Okay, both of you guys are correct, but I think that there's a little bit more specific answer you could get to. Also creative minds, that's good. Who is Full Sail trying to attract with this website? Definitely artists. Okay, who are the people that invest in the school? They come here to be professionals. You are circling the airport.
High schoolers or people.
Okay, yes, keep going, keep going.
Students that come out of school, but the thing is, not every high schooler. There's also adults.
That's right. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm just going to narrow it down to say that the target audience for the Full Sail website is prospective students, right? It's not current students. It's students who want to come to this school, right? And so thinking about students who want to come to this school, like what could they possibly want to know when they come to the Full Sail website? All right, so they want programs. Up, I see it right there in the navigation. What else? Online or campus, I see it right there. I can make a selection. A contact, yep, I see it right there. I can request info, I can chat with them, I can learn more. What, you could have tours of campus? I want to know about that. Or wait, scholarships? Definitely, I could use a scholarship because this school is expensive. And also, like, look at those facilities. Like, you know, that's some pretty high-tech computer equipment. And that guy looks cool. Like, he's got two-tone hair. Like, maybe we can do a collaboration. This looks like a great place for artists. So you see how every choice that Full Sail made on this homepage area above the fold speaks to their target demographic. It is alluring to prospective students because any question that they might have, this initial snapshot before I have to scroll is addressed, or at least there's a breadcrumb that tells me go here to find this out, you know? I think that this is really, this has always been a very effective example of, you know, leveraging that high value real estate area. Like everything on their site doesn't have to be here on the front page, but I have to be able to know where to go next to get my most important questions answered, right? Last but not least, you guys, and this one's going to end with a story, is commandment number 10, give me the context that I need to understand the content on your page, right? We'll start this off with a simple example. In my web class, and, you know, in all of the years that I've taught it, I try to find ways to incorporate some lynda.com trainings in a meaningful way. And I say, you know, generally watch this training, answer these questions, tell me how this applies to whatever you're doing. And also I want you to post your certificate up there. Well, a lot of times students won't answer the questions, but will just post a certificate and send me a link to that on their blog. As an instructor of this class who visits their blog and sees that certificate, I understand what they're trying to do and show me. But websites and blogs are generally public places, and someone could just find that portfolio website based on, you know, a simple search or however they might find it, and not understand why is there a blog post with just a certificate, because no information has been given to me to understand why that has been shared there, right? So years ago, I started asking students to, you know, give me a 1 to 2 sentence explanation about the purpose of the assignment, right? And it's as simple as here, right? In this activity, I was asked to watch a lynda.com to gain a basic understanding of the principles of the web. The aim was to introduce concepts specific to the web and identify skills I need to develop to support my career objectives here. And so just with those, you know, couple of sentences, she has given me the ability, if I was a stranger, to understand, oh, she's a student. Oh, this was an assignment. Like, oh, she's learning about the web and she is in media in some capacity. I get it now. Versus just a random certificate, which is like, cool certificate, I guess. Like, you know, I don't know why you're sharing this, but nice, right? Like, cool, way to go. Again, context to understand the content that you're providing. And we're going to wrap up this lecture, you guys, with a story. And I call this story The Legend of Dan Tilley, right? Dan Tilley was an MCBS student here years ago. And he was just liked by everybody. Such a nice guy. Everybody wanted to work with Dan. Reliable, talented, skilled. He used to have a giant afro. So he looked kind of like Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons. He cut it off right before he graduated because he was going to try and get a job, you know, a professional job, but he cut it. And I had the pleasure of working with Dan, like I do with many students, throughout a number of courses, both in editing for the web and portfolio. And he created a portfolio website that was awesome. Like, his aesthetic was really minimalist and clean, because his interests were in videography and production. And the website that he made didn't need to be a piece of art, because what he wanted it to be was like a gallery wall that he would hang his production, pieces on. The videos is the work of art, not the site itself. So it was clean and elegant looking. And so I'm reviewing Dan's site, and I get to the portfolio page or the work page, and there it's very clean. It's white, and then there's a video. And so I press play on the video. That's all that was on there. I press play on it. And in the video, Dan Tilley is playing the mandolin. Like, if you don't know what that is, it's a string instrument that's incredibly difficult to play. And in this video, he's just shredding it. I mean, I was like, wow, like, look at this guy. Like, I did not know that he could do that. And I watched the whole thing just wrapped. And at the end of it, what logical conclusion could I come to about Dan? Okay, that he's a musician. Anything else? How could I get that? He was playing it.
Mostly because he didn't have so much content and focused on like that main content.
So the only logical conclusion that I could draw about Dan on his portfolio website from the work that he was showing me was that he could play a mean mandolin. But is that what he wanted me to know about his work? No. What he wanted me to know was that like he was an amazing videographer and editor, and that like in this piece he had like created, not only was he the on-screen talent, but he had like these like really dynamic transitions and creative like shots and angles, and that he had audio mixed. He had recorded the song separately so he could get like a fine audio version of it, and then he had timed the edits of the audio to match his finger picking like in the video. Like it was timed so perfectly so that if somebody else played the mandolin and saw him playing, you know, saw the finger movements on the screen, like they would know that it matched the notes that were being heard in the audio. And it was just like such an amazing, you know, production that he put together. But all of that would have been lost because Dan Tilley didn't tell me anything about his video. He gave me no context to understand the content that he was sharing on his portfolio website. Very simply, he could have just given me a title of the video, a short description, and then a detailing of all the roles that he played in that, right? Because it wasn't just like camera work and it wasn't just video editing. It was audio mixing. And by the way, I am the on-screen talent, right? Because there was so much about this video that I wouldn't know because I don't have the context, right? So I always like to wrap up with that one because I want you to be thoughtful about everything that you're putting out there. And does everybody have the information that they need to understand what it is that you're sharing, right? So be asking yourself that, not just in this class, but like I think about social media examples where people are like super vague about like they put just some random status out there and then everybody has to guess about what that means, right? Some people do that on purpose because they want the attention, right? But this is an example. I don't have the context to understand your status update, right? Like I don't know how to respond to you. I don't know how to react because I don't fully understand what's going on here. That's another example of not having the context to understand the content that someone's putting out there for everybody to see. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about the 10 commandments of this class? Let's review. Shout them back to me. We're going to get all 10. Now, go.
Create meaningful hyperlinks.
Hyperlinks, meaningfully titled. Yes.
Leverage headings and lists.
Make headings and lists. Why?
So it helps separate and keep things organized, and as well as like avoids the eye fatigue.
Okay, breaking up dense text. Absolutely. Next one. Never center align paragraphs. Text. Absolutely. It decreases what? Makes it harder to read. All right, next.
Never copy and paste content from one environment to the next.
Do not copy and paste content from one environment to the next because what happens to it?
The fancy formatting that you have can be stripped away into another content.
That's right. Any sort of fancy format that you have put on it in one environment does not always know how to be interpreted in the other one. Next up. Never display text as an image, right? No screenshotting words. Next. Observe consistent padding, making sure that your content doesn't butt up against the container that you're housing it in. Let it breathe, you guys. What's the next one?
Ensure color and texture contrast.
Ensure color and texture contrast. You want to make sure that your message is being clearly absorbed. Absolutely. What else?
Add image, titles, and description.
Add image, titles, and descriptions because that increases what?
Help label things and as well as avoiding file names as its title.
That's right. So it avoids having a file name as its title. It helps label things, and it also increases the keyword-rich content of your site. And then
Mind the fold and minimize scrolling.
mind the fold. That means making use of that high-value real estate area on your site. And then last one.
Offer context for your content.
That's right. Give me the context that I need to understand the content that you post. You guys, those are the 10 commandments of the course. You're going to get opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to practice this, because even if it doesn't call for it in the exact assignment, when you create a blog post, every time you create a blog post, there's an opportunity for you to show me at least a number of these things in however you lay that blog post and information out. All right. This archive will be posted in FSO in your class messaging thread, right? That is a group message that I created and sent to everybody. And so if you want to revisit any of this, it will be there for you to review. Awesome.